happy Tuesday, happy NDC 2021, and welcome if you're just joining us. If you've already been here for the morning, last two sessions, awesome. Right now we have Sam Nasr. Sam Nasr told me he's out of lovely Ohio, which I didn't know Ohio was all that lovely, but it's not like I can judge. I have no room. Just some things. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat on the right. On the bottom is a little survey. And if you would be so kind as to fill out the survey at the end of the chat, we'd appreciate to get your information on how we're doing, speaker. And then on the left is a little sidebar. And in the sidebar, the nav bar, you have different sponsors. ILM, of course, is hosting this like they did last year. I love those guys. I go to the .NET meetup, which is hosted at their location in Bloomington if you're in, but we also do the Zoom. I don't even code in .NET really, but I've been going for the last 2 years for some reason. So with no other, to Sam, who told me that he drank the Microsoft Kool-Aid and has never looked back. He's going to be presenting on security, and I'm going to shut up and pass the mic to him. So thanks for doing this, Sam. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Curtis. Highly appreciate it. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're at. Thank you all for joining MDC. My name is Sam Nasr, and I will be presenting on tools and procedures for securing .NET applications. A little bit about me. My Twitter handle, first and foremost, is Sam Nasr. I've been a software developer since 1995, and I'm a senior software engineer for NIS Technologies. I've been certified with a few certifications in Microsoft, and currently I am the president of the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group, and I'm also the president of the .NET study group, which also meets online. I've authored several articles for Visual Studio Magazine, of which today's presentation is, or part of today's presentation is included in an article online on visualstudiomagazine.com, and I will share that link with you later. And I've also been a 5-time Microsoft MVP. A little bit about one of my passions, the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. We meet once a month. Meetings are free of charge and open to the public, so feel free to let your friends know, colleagues and coworkers. We cover any and all topics related to .NET, and you can find all the meeting information on meetup.com with the link listed there, and I will also have that available for you later as well. For today's agenda, as the title of the presentation indicated, we're going to be talking about both tools as well as procedures for securing your applications and your environment. We're going to look at 3 tools. Of course, these are the most low-hanging fruit that you can implement in your organization without licensing costs, without additional headaches to deal with. And we're also going to look at other low-hanging fruit from a procedural standpoint, other things that we can implement, not just looking at things from a technical nature. So why should we be concerned with security? Obviously, we need to protect the data, credit card information, corporate data such as financial information, and if we work in the healthcare field, we definitely want to protect patient information. There are laws governing that, and as organizations, we have to do our due diligence to be able to protect the information of our customers or patients. Likewise, as developers, we have to protect that information on behalf of the organizations that we work for or work with. In many cases, when organizations suffer a security breach, sometimes it's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that they have to endure. Sometimes it's humility in the public eye. But the net result of that could be a loss of jobs, specifically developer jobs. So that is definitely something to be concerned about. When we're looking at security, one of the things that we need to ensure is application integrity, meaning we want to ensure that the application functions the way it does, and it will continue to function without having any additional denial of service attacks or any downtime. In addition, we want to ensure application authenticity, meaning that whenever we distribute an application to a customer, and I am thinking more of apps that are distributed either via download or USB or other means other than just a website. So I'm looking at desktop applications as well as web applications. We want to ensure application authenticity, that the application we distribute to our customers, when they receive it, they know for a fact that it is coming from us, and they can trust that app to run properly on their machine. And lastly, like I mentioned, the jobs that we could be protecting could be our own jobs. So what are the motives for someone to actually either hack into a website or hack an application or do something maliciously to an app or an organization? First and foremost, financial gain. Obviously, if I get a hold of credit card numbers that are stored in a database, I can sell those on the dark web or in the black market, so to speak, and be able to gain a lot of financial gain from it. In addition, I could also use those credit cards myself and, again, financial gain. Another motive that a lot of people overlook is pride. Some hackers, they tend to be very boastful about what they had done, and they go on various forums and magazines and basically boast about what they had done and taking pride in being able to hack or bring down a specific site or hack into an application and make an organization look bad. Another thing is religious and political motivation. Although this is not an election year, obviously last year with the politics and various viewpoints, hackers also have various viewpoints when it comes to politics and religion. And so you can end up having an attack based on those motives. And last but not least, vandalism. For the sake that they can simply do it, they just like to do it. It's the same reason why sometimes people get their cars keyed in a parking lot when they've done nothing to anyone and they just parked their car and left it. It's the same thing in the technology world. Sometimes people like to bring down a website or have an application not function correctly, all for the sake of vandalism. So we covered the motives, we covered why we should be concerned about it. Let's take a closer look at .NET applications. Whenever we compile an application in .NET, we can use the top tier. And there you see that we have a variety of different languages available to us: Visual Basic, C#, J#. I don't even know if that's around anymore, but certainly C# is. So when we compile those applications, we typically don't pay attention to what actually is happening. But if you look closely, what is really happening there is that first we compile that C# code down to an intermediate language. Once we have that intermediate language, it is then, when we go to execute it on the machine, it is then compiled down into native code, and then it executes on that machine. And the same thing holds true for .NET Core. It will compile down to native code depending on the environment that it's in, whether it's Linux or Windows or Mac OS. That native compilation happens when you go to run the application for the first time. But all applications, essentially when you build them in Visual Studio, first they compile down to the MSIL or MISL, which is the intermediate language, and then they further compile down into native code at a later time. So with that, what's the worst that could happen? Okay, and the best way to answer that question is through a demo. And what I have here for a demo, and let me go ahead and share my Visual Studio. And that is not coming up. So let me close that file and bring it up again. All right. So what I did was I developed a very simple application, and it's essentially a very simplified version of a tax calculator program. We've all seen them, Quicken, TurboTax, a variety of other tax apps that are out there. And those are sold in retail stores on DVDs, and they're distributed that way. You can also download them after making that purchase. So this is a very simplified version of it for the sake of just demoing my intentions here. So when I run the application, I'm going to enter in a total salary, and then I'm going to press calculate taxes, and then it will give me the total tax due. So it's a very simple form. When we look at the code on the back end, where the rubber meets the road is when I press this calc tax button, what essentially it's doing here is that it's identifying 3 different tax brackets. And if you're making less than 100,000, then your tax rate is 37.65%. If it's between 100,000 and 250, it's 0.43. And if it's greater than 250, then your tax rate is 0.51. We then take that tax rate, we multiply it by the salary that you've earned, and we now have our tax due. And for those of you that are C# fanatics like myself, you'll notice that there are no semicolons here, and that's because this is written in VB. So that's why it's slightly different, but the code should still mean the same and should be easy to read. Furthermore, when the user just presses the button and we don't have a salary entered or an error occurs, then I simply state or display the message, please contact customer support, and I list this 800 number for assistance. Okay, so let's go ahead and execute the app. And here is my total salary. For the sake of math, I'm just going to enter in 100,000 and then click calculate taxes. And there it shows me the $37,650 due, which matches the rate here. Okay. If I was to omit salary altogether and then click calculate taxes, it shows me the message that where my exception had occurred. And it's prompting me, it's giving me a user-friendly message saying contact customer support at the number listed there. Okay, very straightforward, nothing fancy. So let me go ahead and stop the application here. I'll minimize Visual Studio, and then I am going to introduce the ever so popular Visual Studio command prompt. And let me minimize everything else. And then with .NET, like we mentioned, we compile down to the intermediate language. And so there are utilities that come that allow us to disassemble this code or reverse it. And that is ildasm. So if I was to enter in ildasm in the command window, you'll see that it will bring up a GUI where I can open up an executable and basically disassemble it. So let me go ahead and maneuver down to that path. I am in C, Tools, Procedure, Security, Tax Calculator, Bin, and I was in Debug. And let me open up my tax calculator.exe. And so there you see that I have several methods that are available. So let's open up Visual Studio again. One of the methods that I have is this button calc tax _ click. What's one of the things that we senior developers always push down on junior developers? Good naming convention, right? I need to be able to look at a method and know what its intention is. So you need to name it properly. So button calc tax _ click, that's obviously an event handler whenever that button is clicked, and it's going to calculate the tax. Very straightforward. And if I was to look in here, I will see that I have button calc tax _ click. So what disassembler had done was it basically went through, disassembled my code, identified all the methods, all the variable names, the classes, and it's giving it to me in a nice GUI presentation as you see here. I can also just simply view the IL. And let me just cut and paste a command here from my script. And we'll go ahead and paste that. So what I'm doing here is I am calling ildasm, and I'm passing the command line parameter for the tax calculator.exe. And I'm saying disassemble this executable and put the output in another file. Output is going to be myfileil. And I'll hit enter. And immediately it responds back. And then if I go over into my window, and let me share that with you, we go over into text calculator, bin, debug, and if I search by date modified, we see that I have a myfile.il. Let me go up a level. So that is in Tools, Procedures, and Security. There is myfile.il with today's date and time. What does myfile.il look like? I'm sure you're all probably asking that out there, right? So let's say that I hacked into a server. What is one utility one of the many utilities that you can find on every Windows installation? The infamous Notepad, right? So I'm working through a command window here. I'll type in Notepad and I'll type in myfile.il and it will open up Notepad. And let me drag that over. And there we see what a disassembled file looks like. It took the executable, disassembled it into something that mimics assembly and C# all combined into one file. And it's got all my class names, all my variables. If you've ever worked with assembly, you'll see that these tend to look a little bit familiar as far as the memory spaces. But then if I was to do a Control F and I'm looking for button calc, there we see that we have the method names for the various events as well as the various objects on my form. They're all listed here, human readable, easy to decipher. And again, because I used a good naming convention, I can pick out what is meant here, meaning that I know that this button is used for calculating tax, right? So it's very easy to decipher this code. Now, what if I was to do something a little bit more malicious? If you recall, what was that tax rate that I used for 100K? 37.65 or 37%, 37.65%, right? So I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to go back to my notepad and I'm going to search for 3765 and there it is. So intermediate language has its own structure and obviously I can't take the time right now because of time limitation to go through the structure of that file, but essentially I can show you that I can reverse this. So instead of 37.65%, I'm going to make this, let's say, 12%. Okay. And then I'm going to save my file and exit. And now this is where the malicious activity comes into play. So now I have a disassembled file that I modified outside of Visual Studio, right? You'll see Visual Studio is, I don't have the application running, it stopped. So now I'm going to do the opposite of ildasm, which is ilasm. And let me paste the command here. So ilasm is the assembler, where now I'm taking intermediate language, putting it back into an executable, as opposed to its counterpart 2 lines above that disassembled it. So I'm going to assemble myfile.il, which I just modified maliciously. And I want the output to point to the bin debug directory. And I'll go ahead and hit run. Oh, that one failed. Why is that? Let's source AMC. Failed to write output file error code. Okay, so it probably failed because I think I have this open. And let's close that. And let's try that again. And now it wrote out to that directory. And so if I go back into my debug folder, so text calculator, bin, debug, we see now I have a text calculator that matches the current date and time because I just reassembled it. I recreated it. And so now when I run my executable, and notice my Visual Studio is completely shut down, right? I completely shut down VS. So now for total salary, I'm going to enter in 100, calculate taxes, and now it says my taxes due is just $12,000, right? Did I serve humanity by causing them to pay less taxes? No, because now if I only pay 12,000 and I actually owe the IRS 37,000, what's going to happen? They're going to come after me and I'm going to get audited. Am I going to be using this tax program again if I get audited? Of course not. So This was a way to maliciously modify code. And again, I'm doing this for educational purposes, obviously, to show you what can happen. And it was done outside of Visual Studio. I modified the code. It still continues to run fine. I'm not getting any error messages, right? Let's take it a step further. Let's go back and modify the IL that was over here. And we'll edit it with Notepad. Now, if you recall, there was a 1-800 message that popped up, right? And it was prompting for assistance. And it's just a nice, polite message saying, please contact customer support. So what if I change this and say, go take a hike? And I'm going to keep it G-rated because it is a professional conference. And then same procedure. I'll save my IL. I'll go back into the command prompt and I will reassemble my code. Operation completed successfully. Let's go back into it again. And now when I press calculate taxes, it tells me go take a hike. So I was able to modify mathematical calculations, able to modify the text message that appears to the user. So having done that, again, would you be a repeat customer for this tax calculator program? Probably not, right? You're going to get audited, you're going to get rude messages, and you're going to get incorrect results. So why would I even bother? As a typical retail user, I don't understand what happened behind it. All I know is I paid for this program, for this app. It's not working right. I'm never going back to them again. So this is a way of how organizations could lose revenue when an application gets maliciously modified. I want to pause here and see if there's any questions. And let me take a look at the Zoom window.
So far, no questions, Sam?
No questions. Okay.
There is a little bit of lag on the video though. So like maybe like 10 seconds, we'll wait and then I guess move on.
Gotcha. Okay. So either I explain things perfectly clear or people are just going into a lunchtime coma at this point. I'm not sure which, but feel free to jump in with questions at any point in time. So how can I prevent this? We've already seen that in order for me to modify disassembled code, I need to be able to read disassembled code. And I kind of looked at the method names to kind of clue me in on where to make the changes. So what if things were not so easy to read and make things and put another hurdle into the hacker's path? So one way of doing that is by using DotView Skater. And let me go ahead and open up Visual Studio again. And give me just 1 second as it's loading. There's a tool called DotView Skater, and that is produced by a company here called Preemptive Solutions in Cleveland, Ohio. And they've been providing the community edition of DotView Skater with Visual Studio ever since .NET 1.0, and they continue to do so. So I'm using Visual Studio 2019, and if I go over and look over into my tools menu, I see that I have Preemptive Protection DotView Skater Community Edition. This comes free of charge with Visual Studio. You do have to go through an extra installation step to install it, but essentially all I did was I went into the search, typed in DotView Skater. Here it's showing me where it's located in the menus, but beforehand it gave me a link where I can install it. So the community edition is free of charge. It takes approximately 4 or 5 minutes to install. And once I have that, then I can go over into my tools menu and select that, and it should open it up. You have to accept the license agreement and click cancel. And then eventually it will bring up the DotView Skater. And so here it also provides a user-friendly message. Your protection is out of date. Upgrade now. This is for the community edition. And I specifically did not upgrade so you can know where that message would be located once you ran it. So now I have DotView Skater open. I can select File and Open. Oh, sorry, wrong prompt. Tools. Oh, under Inputs. So this is essentially the screen that is a dashboard of all the inputs, all the files that you want to obfuscate. And under Input, I'm going to press the @ sign, and then I'm going to point it where my executable is located. And so this is the latest executable. You'll notice the date and time there, and I'll go ahead and click Open. So once it has that file and as part of the inputs, now what I could do is select Build. And it's saying that it's going to produce an XML, which is essentially a map file. And I'll explain what that is in just a second. So let's call this, since I already have a DotView Skater 1, call it DotView Skater New. Save. And then you see that it's running here. Now what this is actually doing is that it's taking all the method names that have a meaningful name and giving them a non-meaningful name, such as A, B, C. We no longer will see button_click. We no longer will see a variable called tax rate. They're all going to be obfuscated into these randomized or non-meaningful names. The code will still continue to run the same. When you call method A will continue to execute. It's just not meaningful for me when I disassemble it to view what's happening there. So for the sake of time, what I did was, you can read about this in the article that I posted, but essentially, and let me get rid of this. Here's a blown up diagram side by side where I have my non-obfuscated code on the left for text calculator, and you see the variable names, button, text, click, and all the other variable names. And then you look over on the right-hand side, this is the disassembled view of the obfuscated code. And you'll see that I have method names like A, B, and C. Same thing with variable names and the class names. So everything has been obfuscated. So if I was a hacker and I'm looking at this, I have to try to decipher what method A does, what method B does, and where in the code I can make these changes in order to have some malicious result. So this is not to say that your code will be completely unhackable, but just like with everything else, security, we're putting more hurdles into the path of having something malicious happening. There is no silver bullet when it comes to security. It's just a matter of putting in more hurdles. And so this is one of them. It's a community edition, free of charge, standard with Visual Studio. The one caveat is, obviously, with the characters and strings, they are not hard-coded or they are not obfuscated within the community edition. With the Pro edition, they are. Now, if you recall earlier, we talked about a .viewskater.xml. And so with that, let's see what that
we
produced.
have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So Sunil asked, if my code is using reflection, what effect will it have?
So if you're using reflection, the method names will change, and so that will be a problem. Because essentially it's taking that executable, modifying the method names, and if you're looking for method X and all you have is method A, obviously it's going to be a problem there.
Perfect.
And so when we take a look at this .viewskater_new.xml, all this is essentially a mapping file that shows what methods were mapped to what, and it'll open up in a browser. And let me expand that. So it's an XML file that is essentially mapping to what the method names are. Oh, sorry. No, this is the DotView Skater.xml. This is just describing the project. What we have is a map file. Yeah, map.xml. So this is what maps the method names into the new name. And so here you see a name for a type text calculator.my application, and it now has a new name of A, and so on and so forth with all the other method names, class names, variables. They all have different names now. And so this map file is to be kept under lock and key locally, so you can reverse engineer the code within your own organization. But you definitely don't want this map file getting out. All right, so that should do it for DotView Skater. Any questions before we move on? Okay, so with DotView Skater, it works with all .NET applications, whether it's desktop, web, mobile. The Community Edition is included with Visual Studio, as I mentioned, and it supports highly complex development and build environments. So if you have things spread out among the team, it can be supported where it can obfuscate the code upon check-in, and it's quick and easy to use, as you had just seen. So highly recommend you using that. Another thing that you could do, I'm going to actually sign tool. I'm going to pass on that for the time being. Let me jump to ASPNetreg. So another utility that is standard with a Visual Studio install is ASPNetreg.iis.exe. And this is basically a registration tool that's used for registering different versions of .NET on your IIS. It's a command line utility, but it also offers a lot of other features. So you can track the version numbers that you have of .NET, but it can also be used for updating maps for an ASP.NET application like the ISAPI version. It can display the status of all the installed versions of ASP.NET. But most of all, the reason I'm mentioning it is that it can be used to encrypt and decrypt. So to encrypt the connection string within your web config, you can specify the name of the command line utility, put in the switch of PEF for encryption, and then specify connection strings and then the path for that file. So the PEF option is used to encrypt the connection strings element, and so you notice the exact spelling that will be found in your config file. And then you can also use the PDF for decrypting the file and going backwards to make it more human readable. And let me jump over into a brief demo of that. So if I pull up my command line, let's clear the screen. And if I was to take the connection, or specify the connection string rather, basically I enter in this command, and then if I go over to my Visual Studio, I see that I have my web config, and under connection strings, there's my connection string section. You'll see that everything is human readable. I don't mind sharing this because this is old, outdated code that I've used before, so it's no longer valid. But essentially, the point is you see that everything regarding the connection string, where my database is located, the ID, the password, everything is human readable. If I was to use this command listed here for ASP.NET IIS, basically it would open up, it would create a encrypted section for the config. And so let me go ahead and show you what that encrypted section would look like. And we'll go over into Open, File, and I sorted them. sorry, it's in a different location, pardon me. And let me browse through that. OneDrive, and sorry, give me one moment as I pull up the file. And so the encrypted file or the encrypted section, let me jump to connection strings. So now here's my connection strings section. And as you see, it is very long and very not so readable. So it's encrypted. And if anyone wants to gain access to my server and see or try to get at the connection string from my database, obviously they would see jumbled text as opposed to something human readable like this. Okay. Likewise, to go backwards, just simply use the same command, but PDF for decrypting as opposed to EF for encrypting. Okay. Let me pause and see if there's any questions there.
Sam, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
The encryption, what do they use? Is it, you know, what type of encryption?
I'd have to look, honestly. I have a link that I can provide for you, but I don't know off the top.
Interesting.
So the user account must have read access to the encryption key. There it is. It uses the default RSA protected configuration provider in the machine config file.
Ta-da. There was a question too from Garrick that says, is the encryption based off on the machine key? Like, is it the server specific?
So it's based off the configuration provider that's specified within the machine config file. So short answer, yes. Any other questions?
There's like a 12-second delay, so
no problem.
Looks like, can you see the chat in the?
I cannot.
Okay. No, we're good. We'll keep going.
Unfortunately, from my perspective, I only see 2 participants, which I assume are just you and I. That chat, unfortunately, I don't have access to.
No, and probably better too, because then you'd be like, it's off by 12 seconds, so you'd be watching yourself back 12 seconds ago. So,
gotcha.
Awesome.
Okay. So we're about 12:38. We got about 20 minutes left, and typically, like I mentioned earlier, the presentation is divided into 2 sections where we talk about tools, and now we're going to be talking about procedures. So with procedures, these are things that we can implement within our own organization.
Sorry, Sam. We have another question.
Sure.
Does the encryption tool work outside of ASP.NET applications?
No. It's looking specifically for the web config, and it's specifically the connection strings section within the config file. It is not a general tool that will just configure or encrypt anything.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you. So typically, when in the good old days before COVID, when I gave this presentation in person, I would ask if anyone recognizes what this building is. And someone undoubtedly always says that this is Fort Knox. Highly guarded security area, has the largest gold reserve in the US. And obviously, because of that, you have fencing surrounding the area, a lot of bright lights, 2 watchtowers on either side, cameras galore all over the place. And so even with a building like this, what are the various points of entry that we can gain access to it? And One time somebody mentioned, if you want to gain access to it, get a job there. And he's very correct. A lot of times, some of the security hacks happen inside of an organization itself. So points of entry, they can come in from the front door, they can come in as employees, they can come in through the side door, through the chimney. And if you've seen Shawshank Redemption, you can come in by other means through underground, right? I won't get into detail. If you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm referring to. But more importantly, you can also be disguised as an HVAC repair person. And that's what happened with the Target retail stores. Essentially, hackers gained access to their corporate offices by being disguised as an HVAC company where they're doing ventilation cleaning. And so they gained access into the server room and they pretty much had at it. What are the various methods of attack? This is just a brief list of the various methods of attack that any organization can undergo. My favorite one is social engineering. And the reason that's my favorite is because as developers, we tend to focus on technology and coding and making things secure and hash algorithms and encryption and so forth. And we tend to overlook the human factor. So we're so focused on the technology and we completely ignore the human aspect of it. And with social engineering, I've actually seen this happen where someone picks up the phone and they dial just a random number inside the organization. And someone, in accounting will pick up and he'll say, hi, so-and-so, I just started here and I'm trying to gain access into the accounting system. But because I'm new here, my password hasn't been validated or hasn't been provided. Can I borrow yours? And surprisingly, a lot of people that are not technically trained for that kind of a thing will obviously want to help a coworker out, right? And so they'll just render their password. Another aspect is sometimes they actually, some hackers will put the malicious code on USB thumb drives and they'll throw them in front of office buildings. And you'll have someone from accounting or HR walking by and they'll see a thumb drive, 32 gig. Oh, my son could use this, or let me see what's on it. And they'll take it inside, plug it in, and then code will start to execute. And typically, the firewalls on most organizations prevent attacks from coming in, right? Or it restricts traffic coming in. But there's very little restriction for traffic going out. And so you plug that thumb drive in, malicious code will start to run. It'll grab everything off of your hard drive, off the network, or it'll target specific files like Excel spreadsheets, and it'll start sending them to outside the organization. Another method for hacking is people actually search on error messages like this, right? Anyone recognize this error message? So obviously this is a problem because first and foremost, you're displaying a lot of the intricate code that you have that's causing that problem, and that could be used as a stepping stone for hacking into the application. Another thing is people or hackers will actually search on the text server error in/application, and it will point them to websites that actually produce this error message. So you definitely want to eliminate this kind of a thing. When you're looking at security, you're essentially looking at holistic mitigation. It is not just a single point of attack. It is not just a technical aspect of it, but it is encompassing, all-encompassing type of mitigation. So first and foremost, location of servers. Where are they located? Believe it or not, I've come across many organizations and still do. Where's the server located? Oh, it's under Bob's desk in accounting. Well, how is that secure? What if that was to become unplugged? Or what if someone was to unplug it and just walk out with it? The location is critical. Second, server configuration. If it's a server, it should be dedicated to be used as a server only, meaning don't install Visual Studio on it, don't install Office, because these are all the other avenues for attack and penetration. User training. Obviously, we want to train all our users. Never give out a password, no matter what, whether it's a new employee or your boss or whoever. Never surrender a password. And then security code reviews. So as developers, we want to have the best code that's put into production. We want to make sure that our colleagues look over the code that we had written to make sure that we didn't miss anything. But do we ever sit down and actually have a security code review? Meaning we're going through the code looking only for security issues. Am I doing any SQL injection that could cause the code to be susceptible? Am I not scrubbing any user input that is accepted from the user? Those things. Just because code meets the criteria that's specified in the specs doesn't mean that it's secure. So security code reviews needs to be a separate aspect altogether. Along those lines, security testing. We need to test not to make sure that just the application works and stop there, but also test it. Try to do your own pen testing or penetration testing on it. Will it accept a SQL injection? Will it not scrub my user input? Can I get access? Can I cause it to throw an error similar to the one I showed earlier so that I can see what the connection string it's trying to get at? It's these things that we want to test against. And then one of my favorite things is what I call active defense. And I'll touch on that a little bit later, but you want to monitor for things that are basically unusual activity or unusual values that appear in your database. And last but not least, have a recovery plan. Sooner or later, we're all going to get we're all going to get hacked. We're all going to be victims of a security violation. Are you ready for that? More importantly, if you work for a retail customer, let's take FTD Floral, for example. Not that I have anything against them or not that they've done anything bad. But let's say that Valentine's Day is around the corner and today is February 10th. So obviously the sales are on a uptick, a big uptick, right? And now we have a security breach. What should I do? Or if it happens in off hours, what is my plan? Who do I contact? In some cases, we need to consider, do we take the server offline? Or are we risking millions of dollars that we'll just deal with the security breach, but as opposed to losing millions of dollars in sales? So this is something that we need to address beforehand and have it set. And I'll touch more on the recovery plan later. In some cases, you also want to notify your users per the law in your area, as well as, depending on the level of the security breach, you might even incorporate federal agencies such as the FBI and publicly address your users that a security breach has taken place with credit card numbers, social security information, patient information, or what have you. You always want to engage the user. So ever since Internet Explorer 8, we've always had the domain highlighted. And so that helps to point out to the users that make sure that you're going to Microsoft.com as opposed to Microsoft-fake.com, for example. Make sure that tell the user that they need to be in the domain that they expect to be in. We want to use user-specific icons for login, and I'll touch on that in the upcoming slide. You want to request users immediate notification of suspicious activity. So engage your user, and during the login screen, tell them, if you see anything different, please call this number. And again, that's in another slide coming up. You want to warn them of social engineering, not to pick up unknown thumb drives, not to give out passwords to people calling them either within or outside the organization. And another thing that I always like to do, whenever I log into an application, some applications, they tell you your last login was at this time from this location. That's a little bit comforting to me as a user, knowing that I haven't used this application in months, that, obviously that date specified is going to be a much farther time period. But if it tells me your last login was 2 days ago, now it raises some eyebrows and it causes me to be concerned. So it's a way of engaging the user to let you know that a hack has taken place. So this is what I was referring to with the notification for the users. Basically, you'll see at the bottom there an important security message. Again, not to pick on Dollar Bank, I actually admire what they had done. But a lot of banks are doing that now as well. they're stating that if you have a security issue, please call this number. In addition, I enter in my user ID and my password, and then in my next slide, it shows me an icon that I had chosen earlier, and it says, if your secure image does not appear on the screen, do not proceed with your login. Again, I'm engaging my user, letting them know, if you see something suspicious, let me know. So this is something that I implement for myself. Basically, anytime I make a purchase, I always like to be notified when a purchase has taken place, and I get notification of it. So again, engaging the user. With active defense monitoring, I touched on this earlier, and what I mean by that is you're looking for out-of-bounds costs. So let's say that I am working for an airline. Typically, an airline ticket will be at minimum $50 and at most, let's say $3,000, for example. Okay, if I'm flying overseas, first class, anything below that and anything above that, I want to capture. Just simply raise a flag, let a system administrator know or an analyst know something doesn't quite look right. Let's take a closer look into it. An issue had happened with one of the airlines where a hacker got in, modified their file system in a way that essentially the people were able to make $1 airline ticket purchases. By the time the administrators had found out about this, they had lost millions of dollars in revenue because they were basically selling $1 tickets left and right. And as we had discussed earlier, hackers don't just do things quietly, but some of them like to brag about it. And so, as you can imagine, $1 plane tickets became viral. And so it led to a lot of revenue loss. So just simply look for out of bounds costs. Excessive number of transactions. Or after hours access, things that may seem suspicious. Why is someone accessing the accounting system on a Friday night, for example? You know, that again, all you're doing is you're raising a flag internally just to address it a little bit further. I'm not saying to disallow that, but just simply take a closer look at it. Or extended login times. One of my favorite things is to create a trigger on the database. Again, low-hanging fruit, doesn't seem like complicated code there, right? All we're doing is we're checking to see that our sales, that there's nothing less than $50, and in this case, nothing greater than 1,000. If there is, then it launches another store procedure that basically sends out an email and says, oh, pardon me. As I was saying, if we have a cost where it's less than 50 or greater than 1,000, we're just simply raising a flag and we're emailing our administrator and we're saying an out of bounds cost has been recorded. Please look into it. Okay. So for security breach strategy, you want to be able to define what a breach is, meaning have credit card numbers been surrendered, or was someone able to get away with a $1 purchase? Define what the breach is in your specific case. If it's a $1 purchase, something might want to put on the back burner as opposed to someone that got a hold of credit card numbers. You have to identify, should I allow the breach to continue, or should I basically disconnect the servers? That will depend on how much revenue we're bringing in at the time, what critical things are running as far as being able to have the website up for our customers. You also want to identify an escalation procedure, contact information. I go through my manager. What if he's on vacation? Who do I call? What if it's on a weekend, after hours, that sort of thing. Talked about allowing and disallowing actions, meaning do I let my customers still continue to browse the website but disable the purchasing and the cart, or just simply allow it until I find out the source of the attack and mitigate that at a later time. It all depends on the business owners and what they define at that point. We just need to make them aware that there could be millions of dollars of legitimate sales at risk. Likewise, there could be there could be millions of dollars in theft at risk. So that's something for the business owners to decide. After an attack has taken place, notifying internal management, local and federal authorities, again, depending on the scale, this is something that needs to be identified by the business owners. Us as developers simply can't take that to task because there's other legal issues that surround that, but you need to identify it ahead of time. For notify consumers if the social security number has been compromised. Once I got a call from a previous client, and they said that we may have experienced a security breach. There was a box left unattended that contained documents that contained your social security number. Obviously, when I worked there, they had my personal information, and so they were required by law to notify me, even though I was an employee at the time. They had to notify me that may or may have not been breached. So that's something, again, you'll have to identify. Local media to let people know that, hey, we've had a security attack, or putting an online warning for users, and discontinuing the availability or the application availability. Do I take it offline or do I continue to run with it? This is a list of the checklist of items, things to consider. Again, low-hanging fruit.
Sam, sorry.
No
Just
problem.
a little heads up, we're at 11:55.
Right, we're going to be wrapping it up in 5 minutes, correct?
Yeah, you can wrap it up in 5 minutes. Perfect. Okay, good. Just making sure.
No problem.
Awesome. I got a little beep from somebody else, so thanks.
Gotcha. Thanks, Curtis. So this is a security list that I would like you to take back to your organization and your team and discuss and basically review where are we at when it comes to these things. How secure is our location where the servers are located? How well are the servers configured? How much user training and security testing we're doing. So it's a laundry list of items to take back. And again, typically I always like to do a recap when we're in person, but again, due to time constraints, you already have the laundry list of things to take home, but wanted to let you know that this presentation could be offered as part of a course through NIS Technologies. There's also a variety of other courses. I invite you to check out our website, nistechnologies.com. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. My email is snasr@nistechnologies.com. You can also find me on Twitter @SamNasr. My blog, I post every so often various articles, samnasr.blogspot.com. And I invite you all to connect with me on LinkedIn. And so with that, let me pause one last time for any questions. And I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I will hold tight.
Somebody asked what the meaning of life is. I don't know if you can answer that, Sam.
What is the meaning of life? 42.
Yeah, right. 42. It's a solid answer. It's a solid answer.
As solid as it gets.
No.
I would love to hear your feedback. Please take a moment to fill out the feedback form, or you can email me directly. I take any and all criticism, comments, so don't hold back.
And then you also have your meetup once a month, right? And that you posted at the beginning, right? But it's online as well.
Yes. So let me share that link with you. There it is.
It was.
If you go to meetup.com, just simply search for Cleveland C#, and you should come across our group.
Perfect. Well, Sam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Curtis. Highly appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it was great. It was great. I was so involved, and then I got a little blurb from Jay saying, hey, 5 minutes. And I'm like, oh, wow. Whoa, okay, never mind. So.
Yeah, I found myself talking fast towards the end because I knew there was that time period. So in any case, we're coming up on 12 o'clock. So I wanted to thank everyone. And thanks again, Curtis.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here, too. It's, yeah. Just a neat thing. Jay, the whole ILM posting this, and Sam, thanks for sharing your experience, and thanks for sharing the info.
My pleasure.
Yeah.